Well, what's the difference between an 80-year-old and a 20-year-old? Iran is about 4,000 years old. America is about, let's just say 300. A 20-year-old is filled with passion, vigor, has a good amount of energy. I suppose, has the courage or maybe the foolishness to go out there and experiment with things. It doesn't have much history to rely on, to study. Iran is just this 80-year-old man who's limping along. And when you're 80, for the most part, you lose a good amount of hope, you lose a good amount of vigor. You come to understand the difficulties of life. Your dreams, which are filled with passion, are now, to some extent, tamed by rationality, a close examination, study, remembrance of history, of life. And so, for a 20-year-old, when they get married, they're very, very happy. They're willing to spend $50,000. An 80-year-old man looks at it and says, I've been there, I've done that. Don't spend all that money. Save it for a house. But, so that's the only difference, really. One happens to be a bit more seasoned than the other. So what you have in America, what you have in the richness that belongs to America is just being young, like a 20-year-old. But psychologically is immature.
Your experience living in both countries, what is your experience with the time, periods of time that you lived in both countries? How was your life?
Let me answer your question in this way. When sometimes we get kids from Iran coming here to visit, sometimes they come over the house and they sit and we start talking about politics and religion, and you have 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 15-year-olds. Their thought process is very mature and very profound. And it's because the culture, society is always in turbulence. It forces you to think, it forces you to be careful about what you say, how you say it, how to say it, all those things. And then I compare those kids to my own kids, and I realize that my kids will take another 40, 50 years to get to where these 10-year-olds are. So I can't really give you an unbiased answer. I think it is the nature of every young culture or young person to be profoundly gullible. And that's where hopes and dreams come about. It's a good container for hopes and dreams. And that's what America is. And that's what happened in the 1960s when America was going through this unique transformation. You had all these teachers from the East coming to the West and telling people that if you want to get to nirvana or whatever you want to call it, just follow me, do this and do that. And they had a good amount of followings. Even the Beatles followed someone like Rajneesh for a while, You can't get that in the Middle East. It doesn't work that way. They're very skeptical. And also they're very grounded because they know the harshness of politics and society. So, there are goods and bads in both. One every 2 marriages in my country falls apart. We have one of the highest rates of addiction to heroin. There's a good amount of depression. I don't know if you have read the news, but you probably haven't. The current regime has a very strict dress code, especially for women. And so a few days ago, a young woman just undressed in public, University of Tehran. And so the security guards, came, beat her up, put in a car, and God knows what's going to happen to her. And so the older you get, in some ways you become very set in your ways, and in some ways you become very flexible. It's a very nice community-oriented environment, as opposed to here, where there are lots of people, but everybody just divided and separated. No easy answers here. Hello, Dagan. What's up? Have you ever dated a French woman? I have. They're no good. But that's just my experience. Yours may be less profound. Sorry, Kelly. Matthew?
In developing a culture, how important is it to have a sense of homogeneity to the people within a society? How much should there be a shared cultural experience and worldview to create cohesion, or does that not even happen at all?
I think you find yourself in a certain geographical location, and then you come to realize that you on your own by yourself can't make life work, and so you need help. And little by little, you bring people into your life to help you, lift this 2x4 and lift that 10x8. And that's how friendships are cultivated. And then life, by its very nature, creates certain environments, certain forces that demand a whole host of people to come together to overcome the negative forces. And then those people will try to figure out, why is this happening to us? And that's where meaning comes forth. And then all of a sudden you realize that 50 or 60 people in a certain plot of land have to deal with a certain event, and they all sit together. And one thing that happens in any community, even this classroom, is that if I was to just go to my office right now and just leave the class beat to you guys, what will happen is one or two will just rise to the top. You just guide the class. And the rest will simply sit back. Either they're too passive to make fun of you, to say, the hell with this, I'm going home. Or they'll kind of just become a victim to your power. So in any community, every community, there are people who just rise to the top for their personality, for their temperament, for the way they look, the way they speak. And so what happens is that little by little events are given meaning. And those meaning become basically the yeast, the thing that kind of glues people together. There is also language. In language you have words, in words you have definitions or meanings, and then everybody will find the same definition. I mean, even look at what happened, what has been around for the past, 200 years in this country, which is, are you a man or a woman? Well, it's simple. You're either a man or a woman, right? And so things begin to change, and all of a sudden, it's no longer politically correct to just go with two genders. Now you have a man, a woman, and 5,000 other forms of gender in between. And all of a sudden you realize you have a culture that finds a certain usage of language inappropriate. And so old school people like me, we have to learn the new language. Okay? All of a sudden, man, which used to just be something that had a neutral tone to it, is no longer that. And so history and culture, they have the power to kind of shift and change meanings and definition. All cultures, China, Iran, India, they're just, age makes you conservative. It's very difficult to inject new meanings into things unless it goes with the old school stuff. I'll tell you a story. There was this man sitting on the porch. If I remember correctly, his name was Terry. Not this Terry, but another Terry. And Terry was standing on his balcony with his French companion. Her name was, what was her name? What? What? And so all of a sudden, this weird looking bird sits on the railing, and the man looks at the bird and says, "Wow, you look sick. What happened to you? You don't look like a normal bird." So he takes the bird inside, clips the beaks a little, and trims the wings a little, and then looks at the bird and says, "Now you look normal." And what you have in the story is what all of us human beings do, which is whenever you encounter something new, something that you haven't been exposed to, you have a tendency of plucking the feathers here, cutting the beak here, changing the ideas a little bit so that it could fit your own belief system. So, not too many ways are created, and if they are created, they're kind of mild. They're not going to impact the foundation of who and what you are. Anyways, this is uninteresting. Anyone else with anything that could maybe, I'm sorry. Yes, Terry. Of course. Aaron and then Richard.
Would you say wisdom is our experiences?
No. You have no choice but to experience things. Processing the experiences and then processing them well is a different story. Sometimes you don't need to process them. Your temperament just kind of just pushes them aside. And I go to this fellow named Malcolm X. And I can't say I know his psychology too well. I can't even say I've read too many things about him. But for a young kid to see his father being lynched, and let's just say that they had a very close and intimate relationship. He loved his father loved him. And it's very difficult for a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old to kind of just process all the stuff that are happening. First being black, second being segregated, third, all of a sudden these goons breaking down the door, grabbing this man and just, lynching him. And then you sit back and you watch. And there isn't much you can do except cry. So that's one of the things you need to understand about life, that there are events that you have no power to control, you have no power to overcome except to shed tears. That's the first thing. How does he process? I don't know. Did he ever speak about his father? Not very much, really. It's not like he needed therapy or he wanted therapy. The culture kind of just said, listen, mean things are going to happen. Suck it up, have a thick skin. You're going to be hurt. You're going to be in a good amount of pain for a long, long time, and that's just the way things are. And he knows there's a good amount of injustice. Again, remember, he's not told to go sit somewhere and process the experience of witnessing your father die. So sometimes some people have the power, the ability, and I don't know how they're given that, to just very passively process things, or maybe not be impacted by some things as much. And even if they are, they have a huge garbage bin on the inside. They can kind of just put it in this particular place in their own consciousness, and once in a while play with it, but continue living their life. They're not completely paralyzed. So what you have is a young kid who processes life in a particular way until he ends up in prison. Now, up to that point, he dyes his hair orange. He very much enjoys being called an orange poodle. He hates the Caucasian community. Maybe he hates some branches of the black community. Who the hell knows? The only way he makes his living is by drugs or alcohol or whatever, right? And then in prison, he runs into a fellow. And he just keeps telling him, why are you so embarrassed of being black? What's wrong with the color of your hair? What is wrong with you? Okay. Now, initially, of course, all of us resist accepting and adopting new ideas that don't go well with our past. So he kind of just looks at this other guy and says, what's your problem? Just let me be. If I want my hair to be yellow, I'll just dye it yellow. You mind your own business. At a certain point, he has an opening. Malcolm does. And maybe it's like, football. This other guy just blitz him on a daily basis to the point that the guy just gives in and says, okay, tell me, what is it that you want from me? And he's introduced to Islam. And then he is introduced to the image of Elijah Muhammad. Most of it is imaginative. And then he runs into him. And the point I suppose I'm trying to make in all of this is Malcolm has all these experiences, but there comes a point where he sits like a good bee, honeybee, and is able to process the experiences. And the end result is honey. If initially he said, white people have no place at my table, they are the blue-eyed devil, later on when he becomes a really, really mature honeybee, he says, no, everybody's welcome. He goes to Saudi Arabia and stands to pray and he realizes, well, there's the white, there's the black, there's the blue, there's the yellow, there's the orange. Everybody prays together, harmoniously. And by orange, I mean Donald Trump. Okay? And he sees this brotherhood in humanity. Now that is a very, very mature place to be. And that means that you have a guy who's gone through a lot of things in life and has had the ability to process things. Just because you have experiences, it doesn't mean that you're able to process. It just means you've had experiences. Lots of us in this class seek therapy. And we seek therapy for one simple reason. We haven't yet reached the stage where you can sit, close your eyes, or maybe play with your past and process the past well. Because every time you try to look at the past, all these emotions come up, and you drown underneath an avalanche of all these emotions. And you say, well, you know what, maybe not today, maybe tomorrow. And maybe at the age of 40, maybe 50, maybe 60, maybe not in this lifetime, you come to a place where you say, you know what, maybe today is a day. And for some strange reason, over time, life has given you the capacity, the reflective abilities to sit. You know, it's no different than chewing food. I mean, you have to be able to chew food, to break into tiny pieces, and you must have a very mature and healthy digestive system. That when things go down the tube, your body just does the rest. And then your body will take what it needs and poops out the garbage. Experiences are very much the same. There is emotional food, there is intellectual food, there is spiritual food. And the truth is, they all need their own unique processing or digestive system. Just because you're able to eat a hamburger, it doesn't mean that you're able to eat philosophy. You can eat philosophy, and it may just be that the whole thing may turn into shit and you will begin to smell. Instead of it giving you wisdom, you become far more arrogant. So, I suppose you could say that you could have, and there are two, I suppose, kinds of wisdom, or maybe four kinds of wisdom. There is a wisdom that is demanded by life. You know the environment in which you live. Know that at a certain point you need to have a companion. Know what's good for you. Know what's bad for you. Know what your parents like. Because if your parents don't like your companion, once you have kids and you don't have a relationship with your parents, that's going to cause a lot of difficulties for you. Especially these days, where you can't really raise a kid on your own. Just you and your wife. It doesn't work. Eventually at a certain point you just throw your hands up and say, you know what, it's too much, I give up. Okay? You need to have worldly wisdom. You need to know that at the age of 18, the next step is not for you to go out there and get a job. Take out a lot of loans, stay in school. By the time you're 35, by the time you're 30, you can have a master's or a PhD. It doesn't matter in what, but that gives you a tremendous amount of power in physical life. And then you can go somewhere, get a job. Not Home Depot, not In-N-Out, even though they're great places to work at, right? Where you can kind of secure your future a little bit. And life is uncertain. You need as much certainty as you possibly can possess. Education, to some extent, does that for you. You will always have your diploma somewhere. And all you got to do is just work on the way you interview, get a job, and make, $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 a month. And then your wife will kind of feel a little stable in life. Then your kids will know that there's you, there's the mom, always going to be there for the most part. Okay? That's worldly wisdom. There is this other stage that is required, which is life gives you a lot of problems. And you don't need to be Jesus Christ. You don't need to be a Socrates. You need to know how to deal with the issues that you have yourself. You need to know how to deal with the issues your wife has. You need to know what to do with the conflict that just life creates for all of us. And you can't just go nuts every time an issue comes up. That's another kind of wisdom you just need to have. You need to be able to process events well. especially when you have children, because they're like great copy machines. They really are, you know. And then there is this, I think, other area of life where they call it midlife crisis. I don't know why they call it midlife crisis, because we don't have that language, at least not when I was growing up back home. Maybe now they do. Is that once in a while you wake up and you feel as if your life is hollow. It's empty from the inside. It's a great life. It no longer nourishes you for some strange reason. And you try to find some comfort in your companionship, that doesn't work. You try to find some comfort in the distractions created by your children, that doesn't work. You try to kind of identify with your job, profession, that doesn't work. And then you get depressed. So you need to have this particular branch in your life that has certain narratives that deal with your feeling of psychological abandonment or life being hollowed from the inside. And so all these events require their own wisdom, their own digestive system. So you can kind of, whatever event comes to you, you can chew them, swallow them, and just wait until they are digested, and then you go back into life. That's what wisdom is, I think. Even Jesus, who sought wisdom for a long, long time, from the age 12 to about 30, if the books are right. That's 18 years of being on a pilgrim, looking for a temple of wisdom. He comes back. What he doesn't have at the age of 30 is he can't sell his ideas to people. He doesn't have the wisdom for it. And maybe that's just the nature of wisdom. Wisdom is just not very friendly. It goes against the status quo. So, just that. And there is a process to get to wisdom. There are steps that you have to follow. And I'll put them on the board in a few minutes. And not that you'll get there, or I'll get there, I just... Yeah.
You mentioned Stoicism. Talking about Stoicism and how that kind of, what the contemporary perspective on that would be.
I think what you have, after the death of Socrates, a couple of things happened. Long story short, a branch comes out and it's called Stoicism. Now, what you need to understand about Stoicism, or any ism, is a very ripened fruit. Okay? So you have someone like Marcus Aurelius, you have someone like Epictetus, you have someone like Seneca. And what they all have in common is that they have gone through all these different stages of life, and they sit somewhere. They have a very thick skin, both outwardly and inwardly. And then they're able to look at their emotions. They're also able to look at the emotions created by outside or exterior forces. And they say, you know what? I can only own the things I am in control of. I can't fix the world. This class, I can't hold everyone's attention. Okay? And I'm not going to waste my time trying to capture everyone's attention. I'm not going to exercise greed. What I'm going to do, I'm going to look around and I'm going to say, he pays attention, she doesn't pay attention, ever. He pays attention, she is mostly attentive to the text given to her or sent to her by God, right? The point I'm trying to make is, you kind of look around you and you say, okay, what can I do and what can't I do? So, what you have is someone like Marcus Aurelius who writes the Meditations. It's a great, great book, but it's a stupid book. And I'll tell you why. Marcus Aurelius has a tremendous amount of power. He is an emperor. He goes around the world killing a lot of people, invading, occupying, settling in all the lands that he has invaded. It belongs to him now. He gets older. And as you age, something happens to you. You're the emperor, you create all the stuff, but your government sucks. And you can't control the senators. You can't control the politicians you put in place because they're not like you. Okay? And your only refuge is after you see a good amount of bloodshed, you go back into your tent. Now, what you have in terms of Marcus Aurelius is you have an emperor who has certain habits, certain addictions that come with being an emperor, a warrior. You're addicted to just going out there invading lands. That's what you do. You're also addicted to be reflective, okay? Where you, after having conquered a certain group of people, you go back into your tent and say, let me write this stuff down. Now you distance yourself from what you just did 10 minutes ago. That's a power that most of us don't have. Marcus Aurelius is a ripe fruit. So if you want to know the very essence of Stoicism, it's this. You have a son. Understand what infants do. Understand what infants are. Understand that they are uncivilized. They're not yet socialized. They're not yet tame. They are wild. If you watch the movie The Horse Whisperer with Robert Redford, they're in the forest. Okay? And whenever you cage them, they throw a temper tantrum. If you want this kid to live between four walls in a relatively sane way, that requires patience. Because he needs time. You need to understand that. Now, you also need to understand that there are times you go home and you want to tame your kid. It's like pulling the grass to make it grow. But you can't force maturity on your son. So on your way home from school, you say, Richard, remember, he's only 2. 2-year-olds break walls, break glasses, break plates. They scream, they shout, they want to play. He doesn't really care who you are. He doesn't care what you are. He wants to play. So get ready to be frustrated for the next 10 hours. And just in case frustration consumes you, swallow it. It's in one of the books, which you guys probably haven't read or haven't even heard of. It's called The Gospel of Barnabas. Not Barabbas, Barnabas, or Barnabas, yeah. One of the close disciples of Jesus, and you'll find him in the Gospel of Luke. But he has his own gospel, the Gospel of Barnabas. And some guy goes to Jesus and says, what's the most noble thing anyone can do? And he doesn't say, seek the kingdom of God within. He says, if you're able to swallow your anger, make sure it doesn't come out. It doesn't manifest itself outwardly. And so what happens is that you go home with this awareness that here you are, a 40-year-old man, you're exhausted, school has been awful, you have all the stuff to do, and here's a 2-year-old kid. Are you going to perhaps hate yourself, be angry at yourself for having produced this particular life? Absolutely. Are there things you can do? Yeah, you can walk away. And that's guilt is going to follow you for a while until you just become passive to it. But given that that's not really who and what you are, at least at this stage, you say, I'm going to stick with it. And so every time your kid screams and exhausts you, you're about to throw a temper tantrum. You, a 40-year-old man. But you must have the awareness about you that this is a 2-year-old kid. This is what they do. Be patient. And so what you have is that what you don't get in books is that if you want to be a good Stoic, you need to understand you're a human being. And as a human being, you will have the tendency of forgetting things quite often. So you have to catch yourself before allowing the world to create buttons inside you and then push those buttons. One of the best teachers you will ever encounter, even though people have different perspectives on him, his name is G.I. Gurdjieff. Matthew, it's okay if you want to yawn. Just open your mouth like a hippo. Let the yawn, do what it needs to do. And so Gurdjieff had come to argue that what the world does is that the world creates machines. If you want to ask questions, raise your hand. If you want to pass, write an essay. If you want to plagiarize, make sure your instructor doesn't catch you. There are do's and don'ts. All of us in this class work for a company called Metacortex, as seen in the movie The Matrix, okay? And so what Gurdjieff did in his schools for about 25, 30, 40 years is that he kind of studied people. He stood back, studied people, because he wanted to understand what sort of buttons they have on the inside. And so as long as they stayed in his school, he kept pushing those buttons, and they would react. And then Gurdjieff would tell them, you're reacting, okay? And as long as you're reacting, the world has power over you. You're still like a machine. You have to summon up the will, you have to be trained the proper way, that before you react, you catch yourself. And that's basically Stoicism. Making sure that you understand the sort of forces that live inside you, forces created by the physical world and all that it contains, and that the world has only one function, to push those buttons, and you have no power over them. The only thing you have power over is to understand them, but that requires care on your part, interest on your part, time on your part, sacrifice and effort on your part. And then every time those buttons are pushed and they're about to come out, something about you rises to awareness and you catch yourself and you become quite passive to it. It's a tremendously difficult philosophy of life. And remember, being a Stoic, it doesn't mean that you're indifferent. Being a Stoic, it doesn't mean that you're passive or non-caring to the things around you. Being a Stoic means you've become a really, 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 really good student of life, both on the outside and on the inside. And after a long, arduous pilgrimage towards this thing called wisdom, for the first time, you're able to dimly have certain controls over your emotions. It's something that James Baldwin talked about at times in some of his talks, even though I don't think he's really the good embodiment or example for this. He always mentioned, not always, but at times mentioned that if someone was to call him the N-word, if you called Mike Tyson the N-word, he'd probably like kick your behind. He wouldn't care who you are, what you are. But Baldwin had argued that if someone was to call me the N-word, I would sit back and say, what's wrong with this guy? I have a name, he knows what my name is, James. He knows my last name, Baldwin. Why does he need to call me the N-word? He's sick. And what do you do with sick people? Well, you try to heal them. So Baldwin would say, I'll take him to Pete's Coffee, sit him down, and kind of ask him some questions. Hi. So, let me just end our conversation on Stoicism on this particular tale. I don't know if it's true, but it's a great story. It comes from this man named Epictetus. Epictetus was a slave. He was owned by a Roman. And one day his master was a little angry. Not at Epictetus, he was just angry. So he grabs his arm and begins to twist it. And he looks back and says, you know, you're going to break my arm, you know that. And the master says, be quiet. And then there's some more and says, you know, it's really going to break. And then I can't work for you. Again, the guy says, shut up. And eventually, you know, his right arm broke. And he looks back and says, I told you it's going to break, and see, you broke it. So what you have is a guy, and, you know, when someone is twisting your arm, there's a good amount of pain. It's uncomfortable. That's not what your body is meant to endure. And so he keeps the pain very, very quiet. And when it breaks, he doesn't say, oh! He overcomes human tendencies. He just looks at the guy and says, well, you broke my arm. Now what? Who's going to wash the dishes? So it's a very unique spiritual path, I think, or intellectual path, or philosophical path, and it's not meant for everyone. You know, and I think all these isms, they have a tendency of creating mirages. that everybody assumes that they can do it because they enjoy reading about it, they're inspired by some of the anecdotes. But the truth is, once you set foot in it, you realize how tremendously difficult it is. And it is instinctual for us to react. Right, Terry? We react. It's natural. And somehow Stoicism is stop reacting. In other words, be more than human. Olivia, yes. Rosalind? Sarah? Aaron? Hold on, begin. Yeah.
Why is it that normally reflection happens in times of, I'm not sure how else to say it, but
First of all, the reflection is not natural, I don't think. It's not something that we are born to do. You're born to react to life. You know. What reflection asks, and the reason why I think it's different from thinking is that you hear something and something about you just jerks. You just react. Reflection is you take something, you internalize it, you take it inside. But the moment you take it inside, and by this time you must have reached a stage where you have certain processing abilities, digestive abilities. So you take the experience inside and you say, okay, let me see what's in it. Let me see how it came about, how it was made, why it's here. Why does it impact me on such a level? Okay? And what this does is that you're no longer really part of life from that point on. Because life is meant to create a very reactive animal, but you want to study why you want to react, and you want to study why the experience is there in the first place. And then what, unfortunately, reflection does, it makes you profoundly passive. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer them the left. Instinctually, as a human animal, you want to slap the other person. But someone slaps you and you say, why am I being slapped? I mean, look, 5,000 years of written history. It took us thousands of years to create spoken language. And we do so we don't have to throw rocks at each other. You have an issue with me? Well, I'll buy you a cup of coffee. Let's go and sit and talk about it. Okay? Now, you have to be slapped so many times until you say, you know what? Fuck reflecting. I'm not going to do this anymore. You know, and you just beat the guy up. So reflection is a tendency of, like a good butcher that separates the fat from the meat. It separates you from life. And you stand on the outside. And that's one of the things that 19th century created, really. Sigmund Freud is someone who stands on the outside, looks at human beings. Karl Marx, someone who stands outside, looks at human beings. And society. Emil Durkheim looks at society. You know, but this is what all these people do. Prior to that time, you have the age of faith, where people don't really sit back and reflect on things. It's filled with a good amount of emotions. Don't reflect. I mean, at a certain point, you need a companion, right? Instinctually, you're going to be attracted to someone, right? Let me give you an example. Do you mind if I use you as Rosalind? Is that okay? You should. Imagine you go to a party, or you're, I don't know, walking the streets, and Rosalind crosses you by. Is that okay? And you say, you're a man, right? Is that okay? Is that too uncivilized of a language for you? You say, Okay. Now, you're 30, she's 18? 18, close to be 20, okay? And you look at her shoes, you say, wow, that's like $5,000. You look at her skirt, $5,000. You look at her blouse, $5,000. This is a woman with expensive taste. You look into your pocket, you have a penny in this one and a nickel in this one. And do you have a job? The answer is no. Can you steal well? The answer is no. You know, are your parents rich? The answer is no. So you're just a loser. The only winning quality you have is that you have good eyesight, you see, you say attractive, and you want to pursue her. Now, you can get yourself emotionally entangled. And given the sort of poverty you have on the inside, you're lonely, you're pathetic. In a couple of hours' time, you know, you'll fall in love with her. You'll be infatuated. Whereas she won't really think about you that much. Before you get emotionally entangled, it wouldn't be a bad idea to distance yourself from the feelings and the emotions you have about her. You say, Erin, look at what she's wearing. And then add to it, you go to her and say, what up? And she says, hello, Erin, how are you? She says, oh my gosh, she's very educated too. You're just a complete bum, right? So before you get yourself emotionally entangled and then fall into a depression, you kind of look at your life, where you are, what you have, and you say, you know what? Let me go get a job, make some money, have a savings, change my clothes, maybe learn how to speak English the right way. And then I will figure out where she lives. I'll Google her name. And then I will knock on her door. Ask her out on a date. So really, reflection in many ways destroys fun. Have you ever encountered a philosophy created by someone who was profoundly reflective, whose philosophy was filled with joy? How about Moses? He was the guy who thought a little bit about this and that. Muhammad, the Buddha, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Malcolm, Martin? No. Fun is just designed for people who are foolish and stupid and unreflective. Good for them, by the way. Why do you think Terry brings me a cup of coffee every time? He's a miserable man. Olivia? Anything? Janai?
Why is that with your own morality and or your friends?
Do you have a vacuum cleaner? Is it like good? Is it like Dyson? Is it like a cordless Dyson? Or is it like corded?
I got a Dyson hair dryer.
Hand dryer or? Well, do you have a vacuum?
Yeah, I got that.
A Dyson vacuum? See? Death is like a Dyson vacuum. It sucks all the meaning into its trash can. And then you look and you say, there is nothing. And then you say, fuck. I made all the sacrifice to end up with nothing. I made all these investments. And then you say, so what's the meaning of life? And then you go out with your friends and they're laughing at stupid jokes. I say, well, these are stupid people. My recommendation, don't buy Dyson vacuums. Buy a vacuum that doesn't have powerful suctions. You know, one of those vacuums, they just roll on themselves like a pet. They roll around. Yeah. And they don't really pick up anything. Those are the kind of ways you want to be. Just go around, pick up some stuff, Death is an ending. The tragedy, look, you and I have a lot of unresolved issues from the past. And we have lots of dreams and hopes that we want to bring to fruition that live in the future. You're going to school because you see yourself 5 years from now living in a mansion, okay? You're looking forward to seeing your kids graduate, getting married, We are just future-oriented people. And you spend your present either fixing the past or reaching towards a goal in the future. Death comes about and says, and it doesn't have to be your own. You can go to a funeral service of a mother who just lost a son or a daughter or a spouse. And something happens when they begin to wail, when they begin to cry, when they're screaming because the pain is just so too much. And your life becomes insignificant. 10 minutes ago you were crying because someone banged up your car, or someone stole your watch or you lost your cell phone. And you compare that with a woman who just lost a son or a daughter. It's apples and oranges, night and day. And all of a sudden you realize the presence of death makes your issues irrelevant, insignificant, without much value, which in essence makes you lose all the value you thought you had. And if your life was sunny prior to that moment, it's consumed with dark clouds. There's no place you can go where there's no cloud. And you look at everything in a dark and gloomy way. Now, the problem with the presence of death, if I was, for example, if I was to seriously consider, for example, that, I can't do that. If you, let's say that, forgive me for using this particular analogy, but I really apologize.
No, my dad just died last night.
So before we talk about this, there are a couple of things. If you want to continue having this conversation, you're going to find me profoundly callous. And you're going to find me callous because I've been dealing with this stuff for a long, long time. And I write about this stuff all the time. And very much like a good Stoic, if you want to write something and you want to write honestly about it, in a way where there's a good balance of emotions and rationality, reflection, as well as a good amount of feelings, you can't be intoxicated by emotions, because then what you're producing is just junk, okay? And it's just meant for junkies, and I don't want to do that. So, just in case I say things that are a bit insensitive, you have to forgive me, because I don't mean to be disrespectful in any way. sorry?
I like the insensitivity, that's why.
So, death always signifies a loss. Okay? Now, there are things you lose that you don't really care for. A few years ago, I walk into my house, and for some strange reason, the lights were on. And I asked my wife, "Did you leave the lights on?" She says, "No." And you come to realize that the windows are broken, the doors are broken into, and most of the things you had were gone. It's such an invasion, you know. And you realize the security, stability that you thought you had, they're all gone. And then it's difficult sleeping at night. And then you call ADT and AAA and GAY to kind of come forth and and fix whatever it is that needs fixing. Now, because at that time I had some cash on hand, I didn't really care for the properties. I still had the privilege, the luxury of having sufficient power in life, physical power, to replace all the stolen goods. Okay. So, I'm sorry? Yeah. And so, and so even though there was loss, emotionally I was not really connected. So the first thing about loss is that all of us in this class lose things. The question is, what is your relationship to the item lost? If I have never loved my father and all of a sudden I get this news that my father died, am I going to be sad? Absolutely. Am I going to be mad that he didn't ever call me? Yes. Am I going to be mad that I never called him to make peace? Yes. Okay. And it may linger around for a day or two or 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, but because there was really no intimacy, okay, the loss is not going to break me, paralyze me, force me to contemplate about my own life. Now, so the first thing about loss is, how intimate were you? If you were profoundly intimate, then instead of being depressed for 2 days, you're going to be depressed for 2 weeks, maybe 2 months, maybe 2 years, maybe you'll never recover. That's the first thing about loss. So every loss has its own degree of grief. Now, the problem with grief and sadness and sorrow is that loss can cause, depending again on the relationship, it's a traumatic experience. Trauma creates pain. Pain, like a really, really good toothache, pushes you into being absolutely alone. You can't put your pain in language. You may want someone to sit next to you, but you want their mouths to be shut. You don't want to hear them. So that's what pain does. It makes you very, very, very alone. And despite the fact that you want to reach out and talk to someone, vent, there are no one. There is no one who's out there to understand you. هر کسی از ظن خود شد یار من و از درون من نجست اسرار من. My secret is that I just suffered a loss. I am grieving. I am sad. And I want to talk to someone about it. The problem is, when I talk to Amir about I lost my father, he says, yes, I also lost my watch. He wants to give me his perspective. I didn't share my story to hear your perspective. I'm just venting, but I don't want to hear your mouth. Okay? And that's what Rumi says. Okay? Everybody thinks that they can understand me when in fact they can't. So in that sense, you're going to be very alone. Now again, depending on how this death came about, my father is sick and slowly getting sicker and sicker and sicker. It's like a frog slowly being cooked in this pot of water and slowly gets warmer and warmer and then it gets hot and it's boiling and the frog is dead. It's very different than I'm expecting to go to Roseville and see my father and then going on a long walk with him. I go there and it comes to me as a shock. He's dead. So a shock is very, very different than a gradual process. If it's gradual, that gradual process will force readiness upon you. Okay? It's like anything else. You don't like broccoli, your mom mashes it, puts it in a soup, you don't even know it's there. Then she gives it to you in a different form. And your taste buds are slowly, gradually adjusting. Then one day she puts this like raw flour on your plate. Eat it. I hate broccoli. He says, for the past 2 years, I've been feeding you broccoli. And now you put the broccoli in your mouth. So, it's delicious. Okay? So it depends how this laws came about. If it is something that is unexpected, what's going to happen is the outcome of grief. Now, one of the things about grief and pain and loneliness is that we don't like pain, so we want to come out of pain, and the problem is you can't. Again, no one can make the grass grow by pulling it. You can't force someone to fall in love with you. You can't force pain to go away. It doesn't work. And because you struggle to find the pieces to make pain go away, but it refuses, a different branch comes out of grief, and that's called anger. Not only are you angry for the passing of the grief that you're going through, you're also angry because you find life to be unfair, you find life to be unjust. You were just getting to make this relationship work with your father, and life took your father away. If you had any beliefs or faith in God, that goes away. You're mad at this whole thing called life. You got two problems now. You have the loss, you have the grief, and now you have the anger. Okay? Now, all of these different emotions become more and more intense as time goes on, and you feel the weight of them more, and it makes you more alone, and the pain increases tenfold. Now, we haven't really talked about internalizing the experience just yet. It's just me, my wife, or my kid passing away. Now, one of the things that keeps you from internalizing the experience and finding your life to be completely meaningless is that you have two kids, and they are your messiahs. Every time you want to, or this grief wants to suck you into its depression, your kid will come, Mom, can we go to Chuck E. Cheese? And you may yell, you may scream. At a certain point, you realize that they're at no fault. Say yes. And little by little, they bring you out of grief. And just in case you have a foul mouth and you get really, really angry, to protect your kids, you kind of zip it a little, okay? So having people on the outside who depend on you can shorten the life of grief and anger. But just in case grief has gone like to the very core of who and what you are, and you can't escape it, before you get to the point of anger, I have lost my dad, I've lost my brother or my sister or my child. And then you take that and you put it inside, within the context of yourself. The grief now becomes a mirror into which you look at yourself and you say, what am I doing with myself? If life can take me into the land of Hades, this dark place, at any time, do I really want to take these lousy classes? Okay. Now, remember, one of the things about death is that it really, for the most part, removes future away from you. You have no future. Death has like a good vacuum cleaner. It has just swallowed everything in itself. There is no past, there is no future. All you have is the present. And the present is this empty bucket. Now, the only reason why we don't go mad is because we have narratives from the past we're playing with, and we have narratives from the future we're playing with. Our life is full of stuff. It may be shit, but it's full of stuff nevertheless. Death empties all of it. It's like a plunger. And you look inside, there is nothing. The past has become irrelevant. The future has become irrelevant. Now you have this huge space called the present. What do you put in it that you can find meaning? Nothing. Death will not allow anything. Now, if you happen to be like the Buddha, you say, you know what? Screw life. It's not worth it. I'm going to go out there and look for wisdom if there is such thing. Because there is nothing under the sun worth pursuing. If you happen to be me, you say, I hope this passes. the story you have in the Mosaic tradition, that when death comes to them, they put this blood around their door, that none of us in this class desire death to come our way. Okay? And so we'll try to do whatever we possibly can to fend it off. Now, at certain points when you've had enough grief, and remember, the timetable for each of these stages, unknown. Sometimes people live in grief for about 10 years, sometimes 10 days, sometimes 10 hours, sometimes 10 minutes. People have different capacities and they deal with things differently. Let's just say it takes you a month to overcome grief, and now you find yourself in the cradle of anger. And your essays are filled with profanities. Your friends call you, you pick up the phone, but you're unsavory. You say things to them that angers them, and then that makes you angry because their brain is just filled with concrete. And then you go to the next stage, which is you go home and there is no one home. And you get in a fetal position and you just cry. And you say, God, let this cup pass by me. I can't do this anymore. I'll be good to my kids. I'll take school seriously. I'll make life more meaningful. I just don't want to go through this again. Now comes your bargaining stage. It's like the end of the semester is coming. The class is going to die, or the semester is going to be dead soon. And so you say, Amir, listen, I've missed a lot of classes. I've missed all the assignments. Is there any way I can end up with a C? And I say, yes. And you realize that bargaining doesn't work. Okay? And that's the thing. You want a way out of this mess, and grief says no. I will go when I'm ready, not when you demand. And you realize it's not working. It doesn't matter what you suggest to life. Life says no. I'm not going to take this grief away. You're going to live with grief, anger, and all your clever ways of trying to overcome it. It's not going to happen. And then when you realize you have no more chips, you have nothing to bargain with, you get really, really depressed because you have zero power. And that's what grief does. Whatever power you thought you had, it is removed. One of the awful things that happened to Ronald Reagan, he was a good president, but crummy in many ways. You would think that when you get a little older, you get a chance to kind of review your life and feel bad about all the awful things you've done around the world. But he began to forget. He couldn't remember anything, not even his own name. Okay? And then you get really, really depressed. No one knows when people come out. And if you live in this culture, you probably will go to therapy. Then they'll give you drugs. Then you have all sorts of different issues, drug-related, emotion that have remained unresolved. And there comes a point where, and I don't know how this happens, and I don't think anyone knows. And I think you should trust me on nobody really knows, because they will keep a lot of charlatans away from your door, selling you things. There comes a point where you say, my dad died, and I'm really sad. And there isn't much I can do. I know that once in a while I will remember my father in good spirits. And I'll be sad, I'll cry, I'll probably go into my room. I don't want to see my kids, I don't want to talk to anyone. But I accept the fact that this is what happens in life. And then one of the nice things about being us is that regardless of the intensity of any trauma, our body and our mind, these machines, will do whatever they possibly can, with or without your consent, to forget, to numb the experience, to lessen its intensity. And then what will happen is you think about your father first 20 hours a day, then 15 hours a day, then once a day for 10 minutes, then once every other day, then once every 2 weeks, then once every month. Then as you remember less, you're visiting the cemetery. A tiny little plot that you purchased becomes less and less and less. And then like once every 2, 3 years, you look at the kids and say, listen, let's go to the cemetery. Okay? And then you have his picture on the mantle. And then after some time, you say, you know what? That picture doesn't really belong there. And then you just put in the box, put in the garage. And once in a while, you think of him. That's how we deal with this stuff. Can I tell you a story? And this story comes from one of my favorite books that I've never read, but only listened to. Siddhartha. You know, here you have a kid like Aaron turns his back to his father and says, I'm going to go out to look for wisdom. He comes to realize it can't be found, not at least the way he's doing it. And then he goes and finds a woman, runs into a woman whose name just happens to be Kamala. Okay. And if you've seen that S and L skit, Kamala, Pamela, really nice. For those of you who haven't, you should see it. It's really fun. They have lots of sex. She teaches him the art of love, which is really interesting. And there comes a point where he loses interest in her and sex and all the fun that they would have. He walks away. He runs into her 20 years later, only to realize that, or maybe 10 years later, only to realize she got pregnant. And this is his son. She's now dead. The son doesn't like the father. The son doesn't like the father's wisdom. The son doesn't like being a monk. The son doesn't like anything that has to do with forest life. The son likes to live in Oakland, by Lakeshore. He wants to like have fun. And he tries to educate his son, but he has a friend, Siddhartha does, whose name is Vasudeva, and says to him, listen, don't run after him. There comes a point when the son runs away. And Siddhartha goes to look after him. He's the father, he wants to protect his son. And Vasudeva says to him, this is not his life. Your father couldn't save you. You can't save your son. And then Siddhartha doesn't listen to his best friend. He gets on this raft, going to look for his father, but the water, the river begins to speak to him. And he comes to realize that sometimes you have to allow things, or you have to just let go of things, and you have to accept life for what it is. He has come to realize that his son is created from a different cloth. He's made for the city. He himself, as the adult man that he is, he's made for the forest. And these are very, very different worlds. And all of a sudden he comes to accept it. He struggled for many, many weeks or months, but eventually he accepted. And he realized that all parents go through the loss of their children, if not physically, certainly emotionally, intellectually. They have no choice but to be disappointed. That's the lot that parents occupy. Parents have no choice but to constantly be disappointed by their kids. Accept that. So when acceptance comes, no one knows. But, knowing the steps as to what comes after which, it won't be very helpful. However, knowing them a little, thinking about them a little, reflecting on them a little, can lessen the impact that any kind of pain and suffering can have on your psyche and your physical life. So, sorry for your loss. There is this poem that Rumi wrote in honor of his teacher. He has a book called Kulliyat Shams, almost 800 or 700 poems, all dedicated to his teacher Shams. Then, in his maturity, he wrote another book when he became a bit more independent. It's called the Masnavi, 6 volumes. But there is a poem he has in the first book, Kulliyat. به روز مرگ چو تابوت من روان باشد گمان مبر که مرا درد این جهان باشد جنازه‌ام چو ببینی مگو فراق فراق مرا ملاقات آن زمان باشد کدام دانه در زمین رفت که نرست چرا ز دانه آدمیت این گمان باشد. And if I was to give you a very, very crude translation, it would be the following. Rumi was a religious man, and so was his teacher. And they both believed that the human soul or the human spirit, a long time ago, very much like Plato, lived in paradise with God. It was filled with light and it was in a place of sufficiency. Then it, of course, fell into exile and it was caged in the human body. So he says, when you see me, you see my corpse being carried in the streets, slowly towards the grave, don't be sad and don't shed tears because that's the time when I'm going to meet my Maker. Do not think that I'm going to feel sorry for the things or the people I've left behind. I am going to be greeted by God Himself. You know, کدام دانه بر زمین برفت که نرست. That I am like a seed. When you put me in the grave, whenever you put any seed into the earth, something is going to grow. Either weeds, flowers, or trees. I am a seed that out of which eventually a flower, a blade of grass, or a tree is going to grow. So I'm never going to disappear. So, yes. Well, anyone? Yeah.
Misinterpretation.
I'm sorry?
Misinterpretation.
Like her name is Misinterpretation? I'm just kidding. So, given the fact that, Olivia, you have a past, and given the fact that that past creates its own set of biases and prejudices, some healthy, some unhealthy, given the fact that you are a relatively unfinished dictionary that gives words meaning and definition, all within the context of your own past and biases, whatever word I use, you're going to take in and you're going to add your own shade of definition, your own history, your own likes and dislikes. So you're never really going to hear what I am saying. You're always going to kind of twist, define, and redefine in ways that are compatible to your own past. Okay? Now, knowing what I know about language, knowing what I know about human psychology, knowing what I know about how human beings desperately try to secure what they have and who they are, either in the past or the future, I can do a couple of things. I can either have a very charismatic physical presence where I come to class, but there is something about me that you feel. I'm not going to open my mouth. And you're going to feel things. And you will want to understand those feelings within the context of language, but you won't. And all you have are just feelings without words. The other thing I can do is look at you and make you feel stupid. And every time your hand goes up and you try to be clever, I will beat you down. Where you actually will come to feel you are really stupid. Who's made you feel stupid? I did. So what happens now? Now I begin to speak. But because you know how stupid you are, and because there is this power difference between us, I will say, but my words will only generate feelings, not thinking, and certainly not reflecting, because you won't be able to get to a place of understanding. And because you've become humble enough to know that you are in fact stupid, you're not going to misinterpret. All you're going to do is to feel. Now, knowing that there are going to be moments where you're going to be overcome with feelings and emotions, and you want to go to Terry, ask him out for a cup of coffee, and tell him how you feel, I'm going to tell you something. You have no right to share your experiences with anyone, because you don't yet are in a place to understand anything. You can't perceive anything the right way. Stay with all the emotions, all the confusions, negative or positive. Wait for about 20 years. And what happens in that solitary space, you will bang your head against the wall trying to understand. And because you like me, you're not going to disrespect my commandment, which is don't speak to anyone about this. You're just going to mold us over your own consciousness, day after day after day. That solitary place will make you profoundly independent. You will give access to people in other areas of your life, but not that particular branch. And eventually that branch will grow thicker and thicker and thicker and will have fruits that no other branch in your life will give you. And eventually what you'll do is you'll find someone to cut all the other branches and you'll only keep this one. And because you've lived in the solitary space, little by little, you will learn how to use the proper words in the proper way to express what lives inside you. There is no misinterpretation anymore. But that understanding is only for you and you alone, no one else. As it took you 20 years to figure things out, it's going to take her or take him 20 years. That's what language does. Language divides. You know, the best teachers are those who tell a lot of stories, and you should look at the Buddhist tradition, and you can look at the stories in the New Testament, just Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Anyone who doesn't tell you stories, they're no good. Because the assumption is, it's a linear approach. You have a question, let me just give you the answer, you'll get it. It won't work that way. A story is like a puzzle. The only person who can put this together is you. But you have to have enough interest, enough passion, enough care. And if you don't have that, well, it's a nice question, it's just not meant for you. Does that? It's good to see all of you. Take care of yourself. See you Thursday. Remember, next week, Monday, there is no school. Veterans. Bye. Thank you.